Hey, Aaron Rabinowitz here for RedGiantTV.com. In this episode of Red Giant TV, we're spanning the globe for geniuses. Oh yeah, we have a special globe-spanning genius-finding machine here at Red Giant, but since it's never pointed to my office in New York City, it must not be fully functional. Well, even though it's in beta, it occasionally works, and I believe that we have found ourselves a genius, one by the name of Mathias Möhl in Germany. Now, Matthias is a German PhD student in computer science, and as a computer scientist, he's used to a formal mathematical way of thinking which allows him to push the limits of After Effects in a very different way than you or I do it normally. But you know what? We're getting ahead of ourselves here. You see, Matthias has developed an awesome script called Mocha Import, which will be used in part 2 of this tutorial, but we'll talk more about that next time. For now, he's going to focus on turning footage of a parking lot into what looks like footage of an airport. He'll cover some Photoshop techniques as well as how to animate a still image of an airplane realistically and to color correct the overall composite. Take it away, Matthias.
Hello everybody, my name is Matthias, and in this tutorial we are going to work on the following shot here. And this is a shot of a short film that I'm working on in my free time since the last 2 years. And actually in this shot I was quite happy to get this cool car, but when I got it from a friend at this time, I didn't have access to the airport where the entire scene should take place. So what I decided was to film the scene just on a parking lot of some shopping mall and then solve the problem to let it actually play at an airport in post. And so what we are going to do is transform this scene into the following final result. And as you can see, now it looks as if it would take place at an airport. So what we are going to do is to create this entire background scene with this moving plane and all that, and then do some final color correction with Magic Bullet. And actually the tutorial will be split in 2 parts. In the first part, we are going to address creating this background, including this nicely moving plane there, and all this will be created from still pictures. And in the second part, I show you a really cool new technique for rotoscoping to place the car in front of this entire scene. And then in the second part, we will also do the Magic Bullet color correction. Okay, for the plane we first have to do some work in Photoshop, and we start with this picture here, and what we want to do is to isolate 2 different parts of it. So first we want to isolate the plane itself, and then we want to isolate separately the propeller, because the propeller should spin afterwards, so it should rotate, and therefore we need it separately. We start isolating the propeller, and afterwards we will isolate the rest of the plane. Therefore we select here this background layer, right click and click duplicate layer. So I'm sorry for the German user interface, actually I cannot change this unfortunately. So this is in the English version duplicate layer, and now we can give a name to it and call this propeller. And in this duplicate, with this duplicate selected, we now choose here this masking tool. If you don't have this in your interface, you can left click here on the right corner of the symbol and have here these options, and you want here this last one. And then I roughly draw a mask around the propeller here by just clicking from time to time when I want to put here such a point manually. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, like this. Okay, not perfect at all, but we are going to fix it later. So what we are going to do now is, with this propeller layer selected, I hit this symbol here. And what this does is it creates this alpha channel for my propeller layer. And if I make the background invisible, you see what happened. So now we have this propeller isolated, and the parts that are transparent here are controlled by this black and white layer you can see here. So this is basically an additional black and white layer where everything that is black is transparent and everything that is white is not transparent, is opaque. And the nice thing is that we can paint on this. So we can select here now a white color and select any brush. And then you can see here, if I click here, I have selected the image. If I click here, I have selected this alpha channel. And with this alpha channel selected, we can now paint. So we can see, we can, if we want here, bring back parts of our image. So this is just for demonstration. I'm going to edit, undo. this. But now we can here start painting parts of the propeller that we were missing. And in this way we can refine our selection. And we can also then choose here by just clicking on it a black color, and again remove parts that we have added too much. So this way you can easily adjust your selections later. And I also completely remove here this part in the middle. So this is our propeller, and you don't need it in too much detail because it's spinning afterwards anyway, so all the details are not visible anymore. So now we again select the background and duplicate the layer and call this one now plane. And in this plane we now first remove the propeller and then we isolate it from the background in exactly the same way. I just make this here invisible and start drawing on this one here with the clone stamp tool. And the idea of the clone stamp tool, this tool here, is that you can copy parts of the image to other parts. So for example here, this red part I want to copy now here over this part of the propeller. So I hit the Alt or Option key selected and left click. This means from this point here now we are going to copy, and we are going to copy it here. So I press down here and hold it, the left key pressed. And if I now paint, you can see from the area where this cross is, pixels get copied to the area where this circle is. So with this you can then easily start painting. And now I go here into this black area, hit again the Alt or Option key. And now I copy from here to here, like this. And then I again here hit Alt or Option to again choose a new source, and so on. And with this method you can very quickly remove parts. Okay, now all parts of the propeller that overlap with the plane are removed. And now we have to separate the plane from the background in exactly the same way as we did it for the propeller. So since I don't want to show you the same process again, I jump ahead in time and show you the final version. Okay, so this is now the finished version of our plane image. So here again we've got the propeller layer and below the plane layer with the plane without the propeller. And another thing that I have prepared is a matte painting for this shot. So I just took one frame out of the video clip that we are going to edit. And then what I did is I extended here the ground basically with a clone stamp tool. Yeah. And then I added some sky from another photo. And then I took another layer here with this meadow in the background. So all these layers are basically done with the same technique as I've shown with the plane. So I just added some alpha channel and took them from various photographs. Then I've got another photograph here with this tower and these hangars here. And then here another one with more hangars in the background. And finally I took this, I imported the plane from the other picture and placed it roughly where I wanted to be in the final composition. And I also took a modified version here of this building in the foreground, where I basically replaced here these signs. And now if you compare that to on top, I just put again the original. This is just to compare it in a convenient way. So this is our original that I started with, and this is the matte painting as we are going to use it. And you can see it already looks quite convincing, but we still have to do something about the color. So I didn't took care about matching the colors here at all. So the next steps we are going to do is first we are going to look at how to animate this plane, and then we are going to match the colors so that everything fits. And all these steps we are now going to do in After Effects. So here in After Effects we start with a new composition and first right click to import new files. So First we are going to import our source video, and I've got it here as TIFF images, so I select the first image, make sure that here TIFF sequence is selected and hit open. And then it asks me how to interpret the alpha, and we've got, we want to ignore the alpha channel, we don't have any. And then we need to correct some parts of it, so it's somehow wrongly interpreted the footage. It guesses that it is 30 frames per second. This is wrong in our case, so I right click and choose here interpret footage main, and I set the frame rate to 25 frames per second because this is how I recorded the footage, and then I set the pixel aspect ratio to HDV here 1.33 and hit OK. So that's it for our footage, and now we import also our images, so our Photoshop images. First we import the painting, we import it as composition with cropped layers and hit OK. We merge layer styles and don't hit this live Photoshop 3D because we don't need it. Hit OK. And now we get a composition that contains our painting. And this composition here makes sure that it also has a correct length. So 922 is exactly the length here of our footage. And if your painting composition doesn't have the same length, you can just click here and select composition settings. And then in the composition settings you can adjust the duration at this point. Here it is already correct with 923. So then finally we also import our airplane. Again, import as composition with cropped layers. Hit OK. And again make sure that the airplane composition that you get also has this correct length of 9 seconds and 23 frames. So we jump here into the airplane composition, and what we want to do now is to make this propeller here spin. So let's take first a look at the composition. In this composition we've got exactly the layers that we had into our Photoshop image. So the background layer that is currently invisible, containing the entire picture, and then the plane itself on one layer, and then the propeller on a separate one. And now we want to rotate the propeller, so I select the propeller layer, hit R to open the rotation, and you see now if I rotate, it somehow doesn't rotate around the correct point. So to address this, I reset this here to 0, I zoom in a little bit, again select the layer, and now choose here this pan behind tool. And with this pan behind tool I drag here this point, which is the anchor point around which the layer rotates, and put it here right in the middle between these three blades, so that it now rotates around the correct point. So what we now want to do is to animate here this rotation property of the propeller layer, and we could do this by hitting the stopwatch at the beginning and at the end, and then having these two keyframes and somehow animate it in between, but I think this is not that convenient, so I delete it again, and what we rather want to do is to drive the rotation with an expression. So I alt click at the stopwatch, or on Mac option click on the stopwatch to enter a new expression, and now you can write here times 360 times 25. And what this means, it means that time means the current time in seconds, so each second it should return by 360 degrees 25 times. And this is because we've got 25 frames per second, so basically this expression means in each frame it should rotate 360 degrees, which means one full rotation in each frame. And so currently you don't see anything because in each frame it does an entire rotation, so is exactly at the same place as before. But if you now enable motion blur, you can see that you've got now this nice nicely blurred, completely rotating propeller. We do a quick RAM preview, and you see that strangely you don't see any movement at all. And this is because, well, in each frame exactly the same happens. It exactly rotates one entire rotation in each frame, and so each frame looks exactly the same. So we just vary this here a little bit, say we do not want an entire rotation each frame, so lower this here to 24. Okay, this still looks a little bit too regular, and also the propeller is not yet visible enough. To address this issue, we select the propeller layer and click Edit, Duplicate to get a duplicate of our layer. And now again we hit R on the keyboard to open the rotation property, and this time we again modify this here a little bit and replace it by 19, just to get a little bit variation. So now we've got basically two propellers that overlap each other and all rotate a little different, and this makes it look less regular. Okay, this looks very good, but as you can see, the rendering is quite computation intensive, so it's quite slow. And therefore, we now render a proxy for this composition. And a proxy is basically a video that contains the result of this composition. So if we use this composition now in others, it doesn't have to be rendered again and again if we have created a proxy. So we right-click here onto our airplane composition into the project panel and go to Create Proxy Movie. Then here we can choose a file name and place it in an appropriate folder where then the pre-rendered version of this airplane should be stored, and make sure that we choose here best settings to see the original, and here lossless with alpha. Then we hit render. This may take a while, so I just skip ahead in time. Okay, so now we want to integrate our plane into our painting of the background. So we double click here onto the painting composition. Then we zoom here as we like and drag this airplane on top of our composition. And so now we have to place it where we want it to be. And actually, I first want to create a new layer that is a null object, and instead of moving the plane, I then want to move the null object, because later we also want to add a shadow, and then it is more easy that both the shadow and the plane move appropriately if they are both driven by the same null object. So we call this here plane movement. And then we parent here the airplane with this pick whip to the plane movement null. And now we can open here the transform properties, scale it a little down like this, almost like the other here, and then we can position it like this. So we can here in our layers deactivate this airplane that we had as a placeholder into our image, and then we can move it a bit. So we go to the first frame and set a keyframe to our airplane movement here. So let's clean this up a little bit. Let's just press here S for scale and then Shift P to also bring up the position. So now we have here the plane at this position, and now we want to move it. So we set a keyframe for position and scale at the beginning, and now we move to the end and then scale it a little up from 35 to maybe around 40%, not much, or 41. And then we also want to move it a little. So we want to move it maybe 100 pixels in X direction, like this roughly, and also a little bit, but really not much in Y direction. Okay, so now with a quick RAM preview, you can see that we've got the impression that the plane is moving forward. Okay, so next we want to add then a shadow to this plane, and we do it as follows. So we create a new layer again, new, in this case, an adjustment layer, and call this adjustment layer. So we select it and hit return. Then we name it plane shadow, and move it between the plane movement and the plane shadow and the airplane, and then select here this tool to draw a new mask that should then roughly look like a shadow of the plane. If you hit space, by the way, you can move here the points around, and if you don't press anything, you can move around here these handles. So with this way it's quite convenient to draw something that looks a little bit like a plane shadow. Now we can modify this mask further with this convert vertex tool. Can move around single vertices and adjust here these handles. Until it looks more or less convincing. Maybe here should look more like this. Okay, this already looks quite well. And now we add to this plane shadow layer an effect, namely color correction levels. And in this levels we bring down here this output white to about 150, maybe like this. Okay, and now we've got a nice shadow. This doesn't yet look too realistic, so I go here, I hit to reveal the mask properties. For this mask we can name this here shadow mask and feather it a little bit. I deactivate here the visibility of the mask so you can see it. Maybe this is a little bit too much feather. Like this, it looks better. And then we can do something else, namely you can see that here the wings of the airplane are oriented a little bit upwards. This means that the higher the wings here get, the more fuzzy the shadow should be. So we add some further masks, select here the plane layer, add here another rectangular mask like this, and another one here. So we can move this a little bit more, like this. And now we can feather these two masks, again hit to reveal the properties. We can feather these masks really heavy and select subtract so that they are subtracted from the original. I again deactivate this one here such that you can just see the result and not the masks itself. So maybe a little bit less feather like this, and maybe we can expand the masks a little bit. Yeah, I think this looks pretty convincing. Or maybe here this first mask, the shadow mask, is still, maybe the wings are still a little bit too big. I activate here the visibility of the masks again, and can just make this a little bit smaller like this. Press escape to leave this one, and again move it a little so that it's here below the wheels. And I think this already looks like a quite convincing shadow. And currently the shadow is not moving with the plane. And to change this, I move to the first frame where it is located correctly. And then with this peak whip here, parent the shadow to this plane movement layer, and now it moves and scales correctly with our plane. Okay, so now let's take a little look at the colors. And one important thing is that you separate two different tasks when it comes to colors, and if you want to get a real good result. And this is, first, if you composite, you want the things that you composite in to look as similar to the original as possible concerning the colors. And just after that, there comes a second step where you color grade for a certain look. So it's important that color grading for a certain look does not save you from taking care that at first everything looks realistic and convincing. So before we grade for a look, what we are going to do later with Magic Bullet looks, we will now take care that all these images that we composited here together look realistic, or look basically from the colors as similar as possible here to this original. Okay, therefore I've got here this original layer into my comp, which is the original frame, so that I can compare. And one first thing that is quite striking here is that these elements here are far in the background, okay, but they look like they have a quite big contrast, and this is something that doesn't occur naturally. So between the camera and these elements here, there's a lot of air, and this air is not completely transparent, so it causes a loss of dynamic range and a loss of contrast. Okay, so if you compare it to this one, if you see here, the elements that are far away consist more or less of very gray, flat colors, and we want to have the same, therefore, also for these elements that are here far in the background. So currently these elements far in the background are here several layers, namely here this tower layer, this one, and also here this is meadow, and also these hangars here in the background. So I select these three layers and go to Layer, Precompose, and move all attributes into the new composition and call these background elements. And now to these background elements we can apply some color correction. So we go to Effect, Magic Bullet, and choose Colorista. And the idea is, well, to make this here all more grayish, what we have to do is, well, the dark elements have to get lighter and the light elements have to get darker. So we select here this tool and increase it such that the dark elements get light, and then we go here to this light wheel for the highlights and decrease it. Maybe like this. And for the moment I turn off here this airplane and also here this shadow so that it doesn't disturb. And now we can always turn on and off here the original and compare. We can see here we've got these very flat colors, and now we also have them here in our composition. So the last thing that differs quite a bit is here the sky, which is much brighter in the original image. So we also apply a colorista to the sky layer, select the sky, go to Effect, Magic Bullet, Colorista, and here we have to increase the highlights such that they get brighter, and also have to increase quite a bit the background color. Oops, I have to deactivate here the original so that you can compare. So you can see here it gets much brighter, maybe like this. Let's see what you can do here. So you have to compensate. If you change one of them, you always have to correct the other one accordingly. So you want this to be almost blown out, but not yet completely. So let's compare again to the original. This looks even brighter. Okay, so we will look at the details again later when we've also applied the final look. Then we can also come back here and adjust this first color correction, but I think for the moment this is pretty convincing. So now we also have to do this kind of color correction for the plane. So, and the idea here is that similar as for these background elements, the plane is much too bright and much too contrasty. So we again go to Effect, Magic Bullet, Colorista, and again make the dark parts brighter and especially the bright parts darker. Now this might have been a little bit too much. Maybe like this. This looks still a little bit too contrasty if you compare it to these elements here. So select it again and make it here a little lighter and here a little darker. Maybe like this. So this always feels a little uncomfortable because you've got the impression you've got such a nice and contrasty image, and now you basically destroy image quality and make it all that gray and washed out. But you will see that finally it turns out to just look much more realistic than before. So it really pays off to do that kind of correction, because if you had shot this here, if this would not be a fake, but you really filmed this, then you would get similar colors and it wouldn't be that contrasty. So now we've arrived at the end of the first part of the tutorial. This is the result so far. And if you want to know how to turn this result into this final result here, then you have to watch the second part.
Nice work, Mathias. We'll catch you again in part 2. If you enjoyed this tutorial and you want to learn more about Mathias Möhl, check out his blog at aextensions.blogspot.com, where you can find descriptions and tutorials for all of his scripts. Again, we'll be using Mathias's Mocha import script in part 2 to do some really nice compositing work, so check it out. Speaking of which, you can find and download his scripts at aescripts.com, a great site that recently relaunched to become a one-stop destination to get some of the best After Effects scripts from some of the best AE script writers around the globe. Wait a second. They must have a working version of the globe-spanning genius-finding machine. Oh, I'll get you aescripts.com. Just you wait. Anyway, if you want to explore some of the color correction techniques used by Mathias, you can download a trial version of Magic Bullet Colorista at redgiantsoftware.com. And just for watching this tutorial, we're going to give you a discount on Magic Bullet Colorista. Go to redgiantsoftware.com/promos to get this and other special Red Giant TV deals. Now, these are time-sensitive discounts. They won't last forever. All coupon codes expire 7 days from the launch date of each tutorial. So again, go to redgiantsoftware.com/promos to get the coupon codes for the most current Red Giant TV deals. Once again, I'm Aaron Rabinowitz for RedGiantTV.com. See you next time.